Hey, so welcome back to Two and a Half Geeks. I'm Dave Altavilla, and with me is Marco Chiappetta, as well as a new half geek. This, everybody, is our good friend William Van Winkle, a published author and master of many domains, actually, not only tech, but some of your own sort of novel work as well, right, William?
Right. I'm working on it anyway.
Amazing stuff. So welcome everybody. Good to have you with us. Today we're going to talk about lots of things in the tech space, as well as various and sundry different topics around in adjacent markets. But from Windows 10 to the Asus PadPhone X Mini to the GeForce GTX 960, and of course Dell's super hot XPS 13 Ultrabook. So welcome and good to have you with us. So I'll just dive right in here, and it's good to have Will with us. We've been without a half geek for a long time. I'm not sure we can necessarily claim that Will's only a half geek, though, right, Marco? I think he's got some technical chops. He's probably not.
Definitely a full geek. Definitely smarter than me. So maybe I'm demoted to the half geek.
Or I'll take it. I mean, I can be brain dead in any given moment. So. But it's good to have Will with us, and we've got a lot to talk about today. So I'll just dive right in. Let's go to you, Marco. I think I'm going to go out of order. We had a number of launches over the past few weeks. Certainly, Microsoft with their Windows 10 launch. Lots of stuff out of CES, including stuff from Dell, the XPS 13. We'll get to that. But Nvidia came out with some new technology recently, and the GeForce GTX 960 in the mid-range. And you looked at a couple of cards from EVGA and Asus, right?
Yes, I did. Let me grab one and show everybody. So this is the, see if I can, the EVGA GTX 960 right here. So it looks like your average dual slot wide graphics card. Totally didn't need to be this big. The chip on these graphics cards, relatively, SIPs power, really super low power solution. So let me get some quick specs out of the way. The GTX 960 has two graphics processing clusters. In its full configuration, 1024 CUDA cores. It has up to 2 gigs of memory, and that memory is clocked at, where am I? I'm losing my spot. An effective speed of 7,010 megahertz. The GPU is clocked at a base clock of 1126 and a boost clock of 1178. So if you come by the site, check out the full review, and you look at the full spec sheet, you'll see the GTX 960 is essentially half of a GTX 980. So if you took the big Maxwell chip on the GTX 980 and cut it in half, you have the GTX 960. Now, with that said, Nvidia definitely did some tweaking and made a couple of additions too. So, in our testing, the power consumption of this chip was super low. Let me just jump into the article for 1 second.
I'll try and share that out for you, by the way. Go ahead.
Okay, so the EVGA card that I'm showing you here, this card under load in our full test system. The whole test rig only sucked 226 watts from the outlet. Now, in comparison, a Radeon R9 280, if that was in the very same test system, it pulled 344 watts. So, huge power discrepancy there. Nvidia also added a new video engine, so this card can do 60 frames per second, 4K video encode and decode. So, all around, really nice, well-rounded mainstream graphics card. In the $199 price segment, the only gotcha is it has a 128-bit memory interface. So in situations where memory bandwidth is important, if you look in the article at our Hitman benchmarks, you'll see the GTX 960 may not necessarily be as fast as a 760 because of the memory bandwidth limitations. But across a wide range of workloads, it sort of balances out. It's a really great card for $199.
So low power, a little bit lower cost, $199. Let's see. Couple of these in SLI, maybe? What do you think about multiple GPU configurations with this bad boy?
So I mean, I love multiple GPU configurations if you need the horsepower, but a single higher powered card is always the better solution. Instead of going with two of these, it's probably better to get a GTX 970 or spring that additional for a GTX 980, in my opinion. But it would be a nice low power solution, and it would run any game out there right now on say 2560 or below.
Sure, sure, sure. William, when's the last time you looked at a gaming GPU?
Oh God, it's been a little while. A lot of my stuff's been in other areas for several months, so I really wouldn't want to admit that.
Some of us have time to game these days, and some of us don't. I would probably fall into the don't category myself, but it is nice to see. It is nice to see the manufacturers continuing to drive lower power product, lower cost product. This is sort of in the sweet spot, $199 range, and this is where the bulk of the GPUs get sold, right, Marco? I mean, we all aspire to have $600 graphics cards on a whim every time a new GPU comes out, but that's not always the case for everybody. I wonder what the market share percentages are for Nvidia relative to the numbers of GPUs they sell in each price category.
Well, this price category is the largest selling price category. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but that was part of actually the initial briefing that showed the 460, 560, 660, 760 progression and how they were the most popular in the Steam surveys for their generations. And this card, launching at $199, it's actually launching at a slightly lower price point than those others. The others were $229 and $249, in that range. So Nvidia thinks they hit a nice balance here. What's really most interesting is, I know low power is not always super exciting thing to think about, but the fact that Nvidia can get this chip to such low power shows how much headroom they have left. If they wanted to crank more voltage in there and crank up the clocks, they absolutely could. So it gives Nvidia lots of flexibility moving forward, I think.
Sure, sure. I'm going to put you on the spot. You looked at a couple of cards. You probably saw a reference design. Maybe you saw a third card from a manufacturer, a board partner. What's your favorite right now? What's your favorite model of the GeForce GTX 960?
So I didn't look at any reference cards. The Nvidia's partners were already with custom solutions. I saw the EVGA card and the Asus card. I have them both on hand. I tested them both. Honestly, I'd have no problem with either one. I really like EVGA's coolers on here. It works awesome. You just don't really technically need it for such a small, low-power GPU. So if you really want to tweak and you want to mess around, the huge cooler on here is a plus if you want to overclock and mess around, with overclocking. The Asus card is a little smaller, but still, performance is right there, still highly overclockable. They're both basically silent at idle because the fans don't even need to spin. So I don't think I could choose one favorite. It depends on the system I'm building.
You tap danced that line pretty good.
Can I jump in here with a question?
Yeah, dive in, man.
So I haven't looked at this for a little while. What's the best? I mean, if you had to pick best bang for the buck right now amongst the GPUs, I mean, where's the sweet spot?
It's really tough to say where the sweet spot is. If I was spending my money, and this is going to be controversial right now because of all the hoopla surrounding the card, I would totally buy a GTX 970. Nvidia's in a little bit of hot water because the original reference guide had the wrong number of ROPs listed, plus the memory configuration is kind of funky. The card shipped with 4 gigs, but the way the memory is addressed and accessible, it will behave like a 3.5, a card with 3.5 gigs, because that extra 512 megs is super slow in some circumstances. But for a single monitor, for below 4K resolutions, that 320, 350-ish price point, it's such a high-performing card that it's worth investing a little more if you were considering a $250 card, and it's worth saving the $200 to not go to a 980. So I like the 970 a lot right now, even though it's kind of Nvidia's in a little bit of hot water.
So you talked about some hoopla there. Let's talk about that real quickly, and then we'll move on. Mm-hmm. So they've got a memory allocation bug. It does affect performance.
Well, it's not really a bug.
Okay.
It's how the chip was designed. So the memory crossbar, has connections to different blocks of of memory, and the way the crossbar is allocated, 3.5 gigs are addressable by this large chunk of the crossbar, and then one little element connects to 512, the remaining 512 megabytes. If everything remains in that fast 3.5 gig segment, it operates very quickly, but the bandwidth is really limited in that 512 meg segment because it only has that one crossbar connection. So
right, okay. Yeah, no, I'm sorry, you're right.
Now, Nvidia says they're going to tweak their drivers, and they can probably tweak the algorithm to see where data is allocated across the memory space. I don't know how much, and they won't be able to eliminate it altogether because it's just how the chip was designed. But again, it's corner cases where you're going to fill up that entire 4 gig frame buffer and see this in actual gameplay. I'm sure people are complaining about it, and I'm sure it's possible, and that mistake in the reviewer's guide kind of throws off the expectation of what people were buying. Most people don't know what a ROP is, but if it has fewer than you thought, maybe you're going to be pissed. But overall, the 970 is still a great card.
Yeah, no, I agree, and you're right. That's a misnomer. I shouldn't have called it a bug. Excuse me there. But yeah, you're talking about a partitioning there that can affect available frame buffer, and if you're calling it a 4 gig card, that technically on some occasions only has access to 3.5 gig for quick turnaround frame buffer access, and that little 500 meg partition gets dinged. You are gonna, like we've seen some users, there's been some Reddit discussion and a few others where above 1920 or 1080p res with high AA settings where you're taxing that frame buffer, you see some degradation in performance as a result of that. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, it's fair. The flip side of the argument is the performance of the card hasn't changed from when it launched. So what you bought and how it performed at launch, it still performs the same. So yeah, it's not configured exactly as maybe people expected, but still a high-performing card. It's not like all of a sudden it's not the same GTX 970 that you got. So I don't know. I'm on the fence. So
yeah. So, but the 970 from a price performance standpoint, that would be your pick.
For a single monitor user, below 4K, yeah, 970 is still a great card for the money. And
How about on Team Red?
290X just got a price cut today. I didn't see what it dropped down to, but 290X, if you don't mind the additional power consumption, another great graphics card also.
Yeah, I think they're approaching $300 like 315, 300 thereabouts.
Yep.
So, all right, let's talk about something a little bit more mainstream, and I'll dive into this. We've been talking about it a lot lately. Frankly, I teased it a couple of times on the site at Hot Hardware, and we initially got a first preview look at it at CES out in Las Vegas. But the Dell XPS 13, and you saw me stretching and limboing a few seconds ago off camera. I'm going to flip this bad boy on, but this is it. Or at least if I can. Let's see if it'll wake back up for me. I think I just hit the off button. But this is the XPS 13. I'll get it into the shot. This, as you can see, is a 13-inch machine, or 13.3-inch diagonal QHD display, actually, that really is more of a 12-inch form factor. And so the way they do this, obviously, is, trim down that bezel to damn near nothing, and you've got a 5mm bezel here on the top and side edges of the display, and the chassis then scales with it as well. So it's 11.98-inch form factor chassis with a 13.3-inch display. I have the 3200 by 1800 QHD Plus display model here. It's also Core i5, 5th generation Core i5 Broadwell U from Intel, 5200U processor, 8 gig of RAM, Intel HD 5500 graphics, which are a little bit more beefed up versus the previous gen 4400 graphics in the low power notebook processor category for Intel. But the reason we've been talking about it so much is because it is by far one of the nicest 13-inch Ultrabooks we've seen ever. And it's, from its composite carbon fiber design around the keyboard and wrist rest area, to its gorgeous near bezel-less display, to the performance we saw with, it's got a 256 gig. Our model has a 256 gig SSD under the hood, and that Core i5 combines for a really snappy machine. Windows 8.1 with touch. Just a super well-built machine with very nice aesthetic. With that carbon fiber and then machined aluminum on the lid and that beautiful display that squeezes into probably the smallest 13-inch notebook on the market. I'd have to take a look. There's been some over the years other machines that get into close to this range, but if you look at sort of the mainstream, what's out there right now, it is the smallest, like a MacBook Air 13-inch, significantly smaller than that. It's smaller than Lenovo's Yoga 3 Pro, believe it or not, which is probably the thinnest machine if you just look at the Z height dimension. And so, Dell's really went out of the park with this. It's won all kinds of awards. We gave it an editor's choice. I loved it. What do you guys think about it? Well, William, I got to be careful. I go to that Will. It's too easy. I'm too lazy. It's William.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what. This is the last year's model. I've been using this thing for several months now. I love it. It is, bar none, the best notebook I've ever used. Very few criticisms. I love the rubbery texture on the bottom. I don't let it slip around on my desk like a lot of other notebooks do. The only criticism I've got is, I don't know if your new model has the same thing, but the venting on the bottom, it's one long strip instead of multiple vents. Yeah, it looks like the same.
Yeah, we got the same thing, yeah.
Yeah, so it's, when I'm using it, like if I'm on the couch, and I got a blanket on my lap, it does have a tendency to heat up real fast. Hopefully they fix that with the newer components. But apart from that, the audio on it is great. It's one of the best I've ever heard. Really solid, great build quality, and I couldn't say enough great things about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. The venting on the bottom is a problem for some folks. When you look at, it's just right there, blowing into your lap. But actually, the Core i5, 5th generation Core i5 5200U, it's 14 nanometer process-built processor by Intel, and so it does tend to generate, at least from what I can see, even under load, less heat than the previous gen product, the 22 nanometer product, Haswell-based stuff. And so I don't think it's as much of a problem. But admittedly, it's one of those things where you've really got to kind of live with it. Like right now, I'm here in New England. It's the cold winter months. Probably don't notice things getting a little warm. Kind of like it, right? But maybe in the summertime, I'd be sitting on the couch with this thing going, it's kind of uncomfortable. I don't know. You mentioned the anti-skids on the bottom of this. Yeah. I actually like that too. One of the things, and it's a whole like bar of rubberized plastic that's almost fused with the chassis. One of the things I liked, or I didn't like about the ThinkPad X1 Carbon by Lenovo, another one of my favorite notebooks, fantastic machine, is that they had these individual pegs with rubber skids that go right into the notch there, and after about 6 months of use, it was hanging around in the lab here. We test these things regularly. Those skids popped right off.
Yep.
And I wasn't thrilled about that, but this is a much more permanent solution. It also provides, I think, better stability rather than just four corners or whatever for that. So it's simple stuff. Little stuff makes a big difference. And yeah, it's a good machine. What do you think about it, Mark? You're smiling over there.
Yeah, because I want to make one of my stupid jokes after that conversation. It's kind of risque, but I'm going to do it anyway because
I think you should.
That machine is so sexy. I would gladly sacrifice some sperm count and have that vent right there. I don't care.
Oh, you had to go there. You had to go there. Well, I mean, I don't know if you're done. I'm personally done. So,
I'm done.
Bearing children, that is.
Yes, sir. All done.
So I don't have a problem with it either. But yeah, if you're a little younger and planning for family in the future, yeah, you might want to. I don't know. I don't think that's a problem with this model.
No, I'm just kidding. No, in all seriousness, it's one of the nicest notebooks I've ever laid eyes on. So I think Dell hit it out of the park with that guy.
They did. I will bring us back to earth a little bit. I mean, we love it, but there are a couple of small caveats. probably can't even really see it. Actually, yeah, there's a little glare on it right there. So see that little, whoops, that little, where my finger is, that little, that's where the camera is on the bezel. And because you don't have any room up here plastic-wise to locate your webcam, there's your webcam on the bezel. And so, you know, a lot of folks made a big deal of this. I don't think it's a deal breaker. That position for the webcam is awkward. It's unflattering. It's looking up at you. And so, you know, also when you put your hands down on the keyboard, on the left-hand side, you can sometimes obstruct the view of the camera as well. And so if you do a lot of webcam work, you know, if you're a crazy, you know, podcaster or what have you, and, you know, you're on that machine, or a lot of web conferencing work, it might be an issue. You might want to get an external webcam. Other than that, you know, the keyboard is a little cramped. For me, it took me a little bit more to get up the learning curve because I like a big, roomy deck. I tend to be a masher. You know, as you know, Marco, you always, you know, pick at me for banging the keyboard too hard. But other than that, I mean, the thing's damn near perfect. It's really a nice notebook. So,
is your keyboard criticism, is that a form factor deal or is that a Dell deal?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's a form factor deal. I don't think it's Dell. Actually, the keyboard itself, tactile response is excellent. Key travel's actually really good for a thin and light machine like this. Sometimes you get these really thin and light machines, and the keyboards are so shallow. The key travel is so shallow because there's just not a lot of room to work with. This doesn't have that problem. But, you know, it's really just squeezing all those keys into a smaller space, smaller real estate across that board. And it took me a little bit longer to get used to it. I'm used to, actually, the machine, the workhorse I've been on prior to this machine was the ThinkPad X1 Carbon, which Lenovo arguably makes some of the best keyboards in the business when it comes to notebooks. And just transitioning from that to this is a little bit more of a learning curve because it is tighter. Marco, you're a big guy. You're like 6'2". You actually don't mind. You like a small, tiny little keyboard area, or, you know, notebook in general, right?
Yeah, I just like the smaller notebooks. So I will get used to the smaller form factor of the keyboard to have the tinier machine. I just prefer the smaller, more portable machines. What about you, William? You a big notebook guy or a small notebook guy?
You know, I mean, I've spent years and years on 15s and 17s. This is the first one where I really felt at home on it. I did not have a problem transitioning. I'm 6 feet. I've got fairly big hands, I guess, and I did not have a problem. I also love the backlighting. I think I'm kind of picky about that, and I thought the intensity on it was perfect. It wasn't too glaring. Great to see at night. Small point, I know. But no, keyboard was great, and placement was perfect, size, everything.
What about this versus like a MacBook Air? I don't know if you're a Mac or a PC type.
I'm pretty hard on the PC. The little bit I've played with the Airs, I would say the comfort level overall for me was really equivalent. You know, if you like one, you probably like the other.
Yeah. It's really a question of whether or not Mac OS is something that's important to you. I personally think currently versus the current gen MacBook Air 13, this machine blows out of the water. You can get it's $100 premium, frankly, but you're getting a 3200 by 1800 display in that configuration. 8 gig of RAM versus 4. The new processor technology that Intel has, Apple hasn't rolled that out yet for their Air series. If you scaled back to the Full HD 1080p display for the XPS 13, the new one, you actually get into Apple MacBook Air pricing. I think and there's even some configs that are like a few dollars less than the MacBook Air 13. So
the cheaper ones are non-touch though, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the other thing, right? I mean, you don't get touch. I don't know if that's important to you. Certainly, for the Windows interface, it's handy. Apple obviously hasn't gone there yet. So for Mac OS. So all right, let's move on, shall we? Let's move on to, since we're talking about operating systems, let's move on to Windows 10 and the preview with Cortana, an updated smart start menu, and the fact that it's available for download now, and a whole new sort of refresh here beyond just some new features. The approach from Microsoft is to make this thing cross-platform available with a common OS and a common app store across all devices, from smartphones to tablets to notebooks to desktops. Great stuff. William, why don't we poke you first? What do you think about Microsoft's Windows 10 proposal and what they're doing with the preview and making it available for the early adopters out there, the Windows insiders? Is that what they call them, right, Marco?
Yep.
This is the part where I wish we would have talked about this before the show started. I actually I've been meaning to, but have not got it up on a test machine yet. I gotta apologize.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. Yeah, it's funny. We get a lot of access to this stuff. I haven't personally fired it up. I know, Marco, you've been playing with the Windows 10 preview. Have you gotten this latest build?
Yeah, I have, and it's sort of,
excuse that phone,
everything that you expected to come as the beta process unfolded is arriving with the latest build. I'm not going to say I'm indifferent. I think Windows 10 is going to be like the big comeback in the desktop space for Microsoft. Windows 8.1, even though it's gotten really good in my opinion, it's sort of too far gone in public opinion to really catch on, so they need Windows 10 to be a hit. And I think the main difference with Windows 10 versus Windows 8 is Microsoft is listening to the feedback this time around. So this whole Windows Insider program, if you were to go back to the Windows 8 development and read the Building Windows 8 blog, it's a lot of Microsoft telling you why you're going to like something or why you're going to need something. And obviously it didn't work out. You know, people hated the Metro interface or the modern UI interface. They hated bouncing between two different environments if they wanted to work on a desktop. It was sort of too touch-centric. And this time around, it seems like all that feedback is finally taken into consideration. Microsoft is still trying to innovate on the interface front, but still building an operating system that may work across all these different platforms, you know, from a phone all the way to a high-end PC. So we'll see how it goes. I am cautiously optimistic.
So you say may work. You don't think they can pull that off? I think they've promised it a couple times now.
I think it's a monumental undertaking considering how few people. So you have a wealth of apps for Windows on a PC. You know, there's no platform that compares. Once you get outside of those traditional apps, though, and you get to the Microsoft Store or the Windows Phone Store, which will eventually all be combined, it's a lot less rosy. And it's still unclear, although it would be great to have the same apps running across all these different devices, it's still unclear what that means for developers to get the apps working properly across everything. And considering how relative few have jumped into the Windows Phone Store, which is also for Surface tablets, if it means a ton more work to get everything working across all of the systems, they'll probably have even fewer developers. So we'll see. The flip side is you now have a huge install base of systems that'll run all these apps, and you'll have to include the Xbox in there too. So every PC, every Xbox One plus Windows phones. So you now have this giant install base to work with. But I don't know. People haven't jumped on board. They don't seem excited with Windows Phone, at least here in the States, as much. Better adoption in some other countries, but
I think that's a sign of the poor uptake they saw with Windows 8.1, with Windows 8 in general. And actually, I've heard that developing for the Windows platform, we've seen some comments actually on our site where app developers have chimed in to say, hey, developing for Windows is actually one of the easiest deals going right now. And it's really just the fragmentation that Microsoft has had with Windows RT and Windows Phone and Windows, desktop that has caused the issue. And so Microsoft's looking to solve that problem, and I'm a little bit more positive about it. I think the app developers are going to come out of the woodwork when they know they can hit, multiple devices with one, core. But yeah, they took a beating on Windows 8. And it's going to take a while to dig out of that. William, are you running Windows 8 now? What do you think
Yeah.
about it? I personally thought, how could you, Microsoft? You screwed this up in
Yeah,
so many ways.
it was hate at first sight. I mean, my big thing is I want to be more productive. I've got, I want, when I sit down in front of a machine, I want to get right to work. When I need something, it needs to be right there in front of me. And I just, all the swiping, the dual interface, it was just a train wreck in my opinion, and I never got over it. So Marco, I'd rather throw it to you, and from a get stuff done standpoint, is 10 better? What is this going to do for me?
From a get stuff done standpoint, I would actually argue that 8.1 was better than 7, but there was a huge...
Oh,
no. This is very unpopular, but the difference with 7 and 8.1 is to make 8.1 as productive or better, you needed to manually tweak some things. And the vast majority of people aren't going to do that. Windows 10 fixes that, though. So Windows 10 will have that traditional start menu sort of. It's not the same start menu as 7, but it has those elements that made the start menu in 7 so desirable, plus all of the modern UI elements, and it's fully configurable. It's not just this one-size-fits-all. That start menu is configurable now. In addition, the modern UI apps can run in a window, and you're not bouncing between environments. I think Microsoft's definitely on the right track with 10. One more key point that I just want to bring up: they're saying this one store, one platform, one set of software across devices is really not true. x86 apps that run on your desktop are not going to run on your phone. There's just simply not. It's a different platform. So when Microsoft says this one platform, they mean the modern UI platform. So it's not like all of a sudden all these apps that run on your desktop are going to run on your phone. That's not going to happen. But moving forward, they'll have this one development center and one store.
So you do not think, well, I mean, hang on one second. If you think about it from a perspective of what people mostly use on the desktop, whether it be notebook or a standard desktop, versus what they use on a tablet and a smartphone, how much separation are we talking about? Really, I mean, you're looking at Microsoft Office, which is now available on the smartphone, multiple platforms, whether it be Windows Phone or Android or whatever, iOS. You get stuff like that. You've got the browser. You've got some games. Yeah, the game isn't going to be the same because you don't have the same kind of horsepower. But how much? I mean, I guess there's a million different apps that developers are going to have to develop. But can you not see a day where Adobe Photoshop, on your tablet can have some sort of reduced functionality version on your smartphone, and it's all just sort of, you know what I mean? Part of a sub.
I can totally see that day. The point I'm trying to make, though, is if Joe Consumer goes to buy a Windows phone thinking, this corporate app he has on his desktop is going to run on it, it's probably not. And that whole one platform message is going to be lost on that consumer. It's not every piece of software that's going to run across every device.
Yeah. It's it's interesting. I think they've got a good opportunity there. The other thing that's interesting to me is that the whole touch interface, tablet, smartphone, what have you, thing that has absolutely driven into technology these days has really sort of been a disruptive force in a lot of ways, and it's forcing the major players to really think outside the box. Apple's got iOS. They've got two different operating systems, two different sets of apps, whether you're Mac or iOS, obviously, and Microsoft is making an attempt to unify that as much as possible. But it's really very similar to what we're seeing even now on the web, where you've got things from a standard desktop style browser website design to responsive designs that look better on tablets, and then the mobile website design isn't even, it's sort of passé now. You just want one design that will scale across screen resolution. So it's a little bit like that. And I think they came out and said, okay, here's Windows 8.1. It's got this Metro UI, and it's really cool, and it's touch, and bang, deal with it on the desktop. And everybody was like, oh, jarring sort of thing. But you know, that they just took the jump too big right out of the gate, and it's like, you know, ease into that, create some bridge, create some you know, middle ground so that people on different devices can handle it. And I think that's why they were smart to keep putting this Windows Insider and the builds up for people to have access to get feedback, so that they're damn sure they're going to get it right when they make this thing RTM, you know.
Yeah, I also think as nice and as powerful as they're getting, you just can't get any real work done on a tablet or a phone. Like, William, do you ever see a day where you're writing solely on your tablet, or not needing a PC or a notebook?
You're talking to a guy who sets aside part of his day to specifically write stuff on his phone, but I kind of do that as
Wow.
I'm forcing myself to do it just to make use of spare time. But that said, there's not much typing, and we talked about this earlier. A lot of that is speech-based. So if people are able to develop speech to the point where it really becomes usable, and it doesn't matter how big the screen is, you know, it doesn't matter what you do with your hands. It's just, if I can go with an alternative input method, then it's fine. But if I'm still stuck with a keyboard, no, it's ridiculous. The small screen is too crippling.
Yeah. You know, and we should move on pretty soon, but let's stay on this for a second, William, because this is fascinating. I think this is kind of, you know, you really, when you think about technology and developing product, you know, you have a near-term roadmap of 1 to 3 years, and then you have this long-term roadmap of 5 to 10 years out. And you've really, if you don't develop and strategize and plan for both as a manufacturer, as a company, you're selling yourself way short. You've got to do both. You got to be the here and now and later. Is the interface going to be keyboard, you know, for forever? No, I don't think so. I think there probably will always be a niche install base, but you're doing things right now. You're kind of a really, you know, perfect case of a mainstream guy from a user standpoint, but you do some pretty high-end stuff from a production standpoint, from a content creation standpoint. You're a pro, you're a professional. I mean, you put out a lot of words,
yeah.
And you're doing speech right now. Your interface of choice.
Yeah, I got to hit 3,000 or 4,000 words a day, and to do that, you know, my hands are the bottleneck. So the question is, how can I remove the bottleneck from the process? And I noticed, I recently got Dragon 13, you know, and like a lot of people, I touched that 10 years ago, and it was terrible. And so I just ditched it and said, well, this technology isn't going to happen anytime soon. Well, now 10 years later, it's maybe the time. So I tried it for a week. I'm still, I'm probably 3-4 weeks into it now, but even in the first week, when I'm still sitting there trying to learn the editing commands, you know, go back, scratch that, and it's really kludgy, my per hour output speed doubled. And that's what, it blew my mind. And I had heard reports from other writers that was the case, that they were seeing 2x, 3x output gains. And so I looked at that and I said, okay, obviously there's going to be a learning curve here. There's so much bias built in for mouse and keyboard. And plus using Google's speech-to-text engine, you know, it's really hit and miss, doesn't deal with background noise very well. But it's getting really close. It's finally time, I think, to start looking at these other input paradigms and adapting yourself to them if productivity is a big deal to you.
So you could easily see a day where talking to your tablet or your smartphone to get work done, because you don't need the keyboard, is totally viable.
Yeah, and I like, you know, I mean, we're self-employed guys, you know, we float around, you got to take the kids to the sports or whatever, and you maybe only have 5 or 10 minutes where you're sitting around twiddling your thumbs. Well, now I can still get stuff done. I'm not limited by even a notebook form factor. There are some places where you just can't bring that stuff around, but I can bring a pocket-sized device. And if I can still maintain my output, even in those off moments, that's a huge boost for me.
Wow. Interesting stuff. And it's great to be in tech. I mean, this is the fascinating stuff that I think drives us all, and pretty cool. And we'll have to stay in touch with you on that, because Marco and I share that same bottleneck, by the way.
I have the additional bottleneck where I can't switch. Like, if I had 15, 20 minutes to quickly try to, you know, run through some words, I can't do it. My brain just doesn't get into the mode fast enough.
I guarantee you that's a conditioning thing. If you force yourself and you practice it, it gets better.
I definitely have to do that, and I will be picking your brain.
So this is a perfect segue. This is a perfect segue. We're talking about tablets and smartphones that can get real work done. We took a look at a product actually this week that is a very interesting concept by Asus, and perhaps hasn't killed it from an execution standpoint, I think is more the issue here. But the Asus PadPhone X Mini, which is a hybrid smartphone tablet device. It is based on an Intel, what's the Atom processor? Atom Z2560 at 1.6 gigahertz. So it's a little bit lower end chip. It's not a real beefy high-end Qualcomm product, or even a quad-core Atom variant, higher-end Intel Atom variant. But interestingly enough, it's got a gig of RAM, 8 gig of storage. So again, a low sort of lower end put up on the smartphone side. But Android 4.4 KitKat, and what else can I tell you about it? 4.5-inch display. So the cool thing about this is that it's got a built-in mechanical, I'm going to see if I can share it out, a built-in mechanical keyboard dock, and turns it, or excuse me, not keyboard dock, a tablet dock. I was stuck on keyboards. Present to everyone. Here we go. I don't know if you guys can see that, but it is a plug-in, socket for a tablet, a larger tablet device. The tablet, Marco, help me with this, is how big? 7-inch tablet, right?
7-inch, 1280 by 800 res.
Yeah, pad. So the thing that we thought about this, or I guess the initial takeaways we had of this was that a little bit low end, it's cheap. I think it's $199 for the kit, or is it $299 for both?
It was $199. It might be cheaper now.
$199 for a 7-inch, essentially a device that's a 7-inch tablet and a 4.5-inch Android smartphone. Pretty cheap. So they went after the low end, the low cost solution here. But it's an interesting product. I thought it was a very interesting product, and it would really play well. I'm surprised they haven't done, and probably we should look into this a little bit more. They may have something in the works, a higher end put up, a higher end version with a higher res display for the tablet, maybe a little bit larger display for the smartphone, and a little bit more beef. But pretty cool, right? I mean, what were your thoughts about this machine, Marco?
So I like the concept. This particular one, I think it missed the mark somewhat. If you only have a couple $100 and you want a phone and tablet, it'll probably serve you well. What I think what Asus should have done, or somebody should do, is that tablet portion should be sort of marketed as a screen amplifier and a battery booster, and they should have a really high-end device, the phone that is desirable across the board, a no compromise high-end phone that people want, and by sliding it into the dock, you just get the bigger screen and double battery life, let's say. And you only have two hands, so you're not using your phone and tablet at the same time. But if I'm sitting on the couch and I have my phone in my pocket and I want the big screen, just slide it in, no compromise. All my apps are there, everything is right there. You just get the bigger screen. This particular one is kind of bulky. It doesn't sit flat. It's got like a bulge in the back. It's not terribly fast. They pull off the concept, but in total, the entire experience isn't perfect, and I think it's because it was trying to hit this lower price point and not shoot for the stars in terms of specs.
What was the Motorola product that came out, and I'm blanking on it now?
Years ago, the one with the Tegra 2 in it?
Yeah, there was a hybrid like this.
The Atrix.
Yeah, the Atrix, which... Did it have a tablet dock? I think it did.
It had like a notebook dock, sort of, if I'm remembering correctly.
That's what it was. It was a notebook dock. Yeah, that's right. You slid that sucker into a notebook. I think that's a concept that is fantastic, and manufacturers should build on this more, because we're all playing with these supercomputers in our pockets with serious horsepower. And some of these phones are coming out with 2560 res, and 1080 res is sort of the minimum bar for a premium smartphone these days, so they all can push the pixels. Why not make them more useful to plug into larger display devices? I think it's a great idea. William, what do you think about that?
Well, so what's the use case on this thing? I mean, yeah, it's a nifty gee whiz demonstration of technology, no question there. But what are you going to do with that bigger screen? I mean, is this strictly for media consumption? And if it is, doesn't it make more sense to address the audio side of it as well? I mean, if I'm going to be docking into something, I haven't used this thing, so I mean, are there two stereo speakers that you can do? Like this is on the Nexus 6, the phablet thing. So Nexus 6, you get nice stereo separation. That's great because big screen should have, it's built for media. So how does this target a use case?
Well, see, you're sort of this is why I think it sort of misses the mark. There is a slightly better audio experience and a slightly bigger screen, but they're not great. So, and which is sort of what I was getting at. That the tablet portion should be an amplifier of sorts for a high performance device where you get the better screen, better speakers, more battery life. You're simply taking your existing device and making it better. This just takes your device and makes it bigger. There's a difference. Doesn't necessarily make it better. That's where I think they missed the mark. It gets the job done. It works. It's just there's missed opportunity there.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I think this product is it works really well as a more premium product. I think it works better as a more premium product. A little bit more horsepower in the phone, as you say, upgraded speakers, and a better screen, with a built-in battery. That dock provides additional functionality and performance that you wouldn't get with just the phone in it. But I think in general, I think the concept is sound, and I'm surprised, again, with just the type of horsepower we have on board smartphones these days, that more manufacturers haven't done that, haven't fleshed that out, like the Atrix back in its day, which sort of was
Android
really cool. Everybody
ready.
Talked about it, and then it went away, right?
Yeah, I mean, Android wasn't ready for that back then. That was an Android device, and it just wasn't there.
Good
What
point.
really needs to happen is Intel has to make some killer x86 tiny processors so you have a full PC in your 4.5-inch phone. Then it's like plug it into a notebook and you have your notebook. You have all your stuff. That would be interesting, but that's a ways off, I think.
Yeah, I don't know how far we are off from that. If you look at the Venue 8 7000, which we'll be talking about, geez, we should be talking about that next podcast, next webcast.
Yes.
The Venue 8 7000 is wafer thin, tiny, and I mean, and that's basically, well, I think it's got the horsepower to do it eventually, right?
If you consider Bay Trail to have the necessary horsepower for your needs, for some people, yeah, Bay Trail would. I don't know if everybody would say that.
No, yeah, I mean, they're doing it in Chromebooks, so why not?
Yep.
But well, interesting stuff. Guys, have anything to add? What are we missing today? What can we tell the viewers that we're...
Well, I think we were going to talk the Alienware Alpha, but I'm not sure we still have time. Do we have time?
Oh yeah, we can touch on the Alpha real quick, and then we should call it a day.
Yeah. So we took a look at the entry-level Alienware Alpha on the site. We have a video review and a full written review with benchmarks. If you're unfamiliar with the Alpha, it's Dell Alienware's. It was going to be a Steam box, but it's now running Windows, and it's basically a competitor for consoles. It's a living room PC designed for gamers, by gamers. Really beautiful little device, begging for a couple of upgrades. A faster GPU and an SSD would make the thing awesome. As it is, I would personally buy it over one of the consoles. I'm not sure anybody else would. I'll deal with the the additional struggles of being a PC gamer and not quite being as user friendly sitting on a couch, but pretty cool little device.
Yeah, that's another thing where there's definitely some trade-off. It's small, it's tiny, it's smaller than the average current gen console, right? And
Way smaller. Yeah.
Way smaller. But Core i3 and, let's see, it was a sort of a mobile GPU. Is it GeForce GTX? Is it 860M?
It's a custom 860M, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But probably more horsepower than the average console, right? Xbox One or PS4, right?
It does. The only kicker is normally when you talk PC versus console, PC is PC's better graphics, higher frame rates, higher resolutions, yada yada. You're targeting 1080p tech right now, maybe eventually 4K, but you're targeting 1080p with a console at this point. And the particular GPU CPU combo in the first gen alpha is not hitting 60 frames per second every game 1080p. Some games yes, some games no, so you have to crank down the image quality to get smooth frame rates, and then you eliminate some of that argument of what makes the PC better than a console. I'd still side with the PC for the flexibility, and you can, even though the alpha is more expensive than a console, it's the entry level one starts at $499. You can amass a much bigger library of games through Steam for a fraction of the price of console games. So,
yeah, I agree with that, and it's nice to have the home theater PC set up as part of the deal with this product. Adds a ton more functionality, although admittedly, and William, I'll go to you. Admittedly, I'm not a user that takes advantage of a home theater PC. Every time I've tried it, and it sounds like a noble cause. I love my desktop. I'm a PC guy. I put that thing in there, and I think I'm going to use it, and I don't end up using it all that much. Now, I'm not a big streamer guy with scads of video, movies downloaded. Marco, I know you've got quite a library.
I don't know what you're talking about.
but I don't do that. I know a lot of folks do. The cord cutters especially. I tend to not go that way. William, what about you? Are you a home theater PC guy? Would this
like you, I've dabbled with
you?
it for 10, 15 years. I've had several false starts. There's habitually been the networking part of it that we've struggled with. And just getting a good UI that you felt comfortable with, that had all the file support and formats that you needed. I guess what it boils down to is I can do it, but I don't do it simply because I just don't want my kids and myself hanging out in the living room watching a screen for 2 or 3 more hours a day. I got enough of that.
That's a healthy thing. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I love the technology. I could be converted. I mean, if it was the right experience out of the box that gave me everything I needed and it was a seamless plug-in into my amp, yes, I might go that way still, but I haven't seen a compelling reason to go that way yet.
Yeah. No, I've had the same sort of thing. I aspired to really take advantage of a home theater PC. I haven't. My cable box, quite frankly, is getting more and more functionality that offers that, which kind of annoys me. I'm not necessarily happy with giving Comcast more control of my living room. But Marco, you're a home theater power user, right?
Yeah, the key to make everything smooth, nice. If you can go wire, great. That's the best way to go. If you can't, a good fast 802.11n or AC router, XBMC installed on the home theater PC, and have all of your files on a network drive somewhere that you can access from anywhere in the house, so you have that one library for any home theater PC. And theoretically, you can have 800 movies at your fingertips whenever you want. I don't know anybody that has a 16 terabyte NAS with 800 movies on it in their basement, but you could do it.
He says like it sounds familiar. XBMC, this is interesting too. XBMC, I've heard it. People talk about it. Ayaz, our previous half geek, uses it. What is this thing? I know I'm sounding like a noob, but I am.
So it's actually changed names recently. I think it's called Kodi now, Kodi. It started out as the Xbox Media Center. So the Xbox 360, when it was more easily modified, some guys built this media player that would basically play any type of media, and it had a slick 10-foot interface. It has since evolved to work on basically every platform, and it's super tiny. You can have Linux distros that fit on an SD card that you boot from that run XBMC, or you can just install it as an app in Windows. And once you've installed it and initially set it up, you can assign paths to your media. So if you have a network attached storage with all your stuff, just assign that path, and when you go to videos or music, it's just right there in the interface. So it's just a handy interface for playing media.
Very cool. Well, the folks at Dell Alienware have configured their own 10-foot interface for the Alpha. It's an interesting machine. That 10-foot interface is targeted for gaming. You get everything from being able to fire up and get into your Steam library to controller setup and what have you. I think the Steam box concept was an interesting concept that maybe Valve someday will actually execute on. But it's nice to see Dell said, we're not waiting around for Valve. Here's a Windows-based machine. We've got a 10-foot UI for gaming. I think Alienware Dell could take it one step further and add that 10-foot UI for media as well, and that would I think would be a very interesting ad for that product, right?
They could. It is technically a full Windows PC though, so you just throw XBMC on that if you wanted it for media.
Sure, yeah, but why not? If you want to make it brainless for the average consumer, the mainstream consumer, build that 10-foot interface out a little bit more. What are you laughing for?
Because you said you want to make it brainless, and I was going to say just go buy a Mac then. But
oh wow. Yeah, no, but I mean, if you built that in, in addition to, okay, I got my Steam library or whatever game I'm, in this 10-foot interface, then, I need my media now, and, how about movies and, I don't know, plug in for Netflix. I mean, you can think of a number of different small hooks you could add that could really enhance the functionality there. So,
yep, no reason they couldn't do it. They could definitely do it.
Cool stuff. Well, I think that about wraps us, guys. If you're tripping around the web, we are located at a number of locations. Certainly, HotHardware.com is the main place to be, but over at YouTube.com, where you're probably watching this right now, Google Hangout-driven YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel is youtube.com/HotHardwareVids. Give us a thumbs up on this video if you would, to like it if you like it, and subscribe. We'd love to have you with us on a regular basis. We do lots of reviews, how-tos, and of course the 2.5 Geeks webcast there. Facebook.com/HotHardware and Twitter.com/HotHardware. If you tweet and face, I guess. Guys, thanks for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. And William, good to have you with us, brother.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thanks for stopping by, everybody. Take care.